Welcome back for another Wednesday episode and hopefully the last part of the big brake install on the Miata. I want to start this episode off with a shout out to Flowforce. You've probably heard of them if you bought their injectors or coil and plug kits or anything like that. They make nice plug and play LS coil units, but they also make these brake adapters. So an NB Sport brake is a very common rear caliper upgrade for Miatas. It lets you run an 11-inch rear rotor, or 10.9-inch rear rotor, sorry, as opposed to the stock 1.6 brakes that I have in the rear, which are, I believe, 9-inch or smaller. So what these adapters do is I have 1.8 regular rear brakes from my NA8. So what this does is it spaces the caliper out far enough that you can run the NB Sport size rear rotors with an NA8 or a non-NB Sport caliper. If you've ever tried to buy pads for an NB Sport caliper, there's like maybe 5 good options. Whereas the regular caliper size, there's essentially infinite options of pad combinations you can run. And they're easier to source. You know, if you need some in a pinch, your local AutoZone's gonna have them, whereas NB Sport ones, you might be hurting to find a set of pads. I went through Flowforce. I'll put Nigel's contact info down below. This is not sponsored in any way. I heard about this product through my buddy Joe, and I thought it was awesome because I didn't want to go buy either Willwood rears or NB Sport rears. He can set you up with what you see here. So there's one adapter bracket for each side. It sends you all brand new hardware for it. I ordered another set of DTC 60 pads. These are for the rears. They'll go with the DTC 60 fronts. This will be the track setup. And then these are HPS fronts for the Willwoods, and these are HPS rears for the 1.8 brakes. I just told him what I had, and he set everything up. Contact was great. I emailed him from like 6:30 in the morning until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. I got the whole deal done in a day, and he shipped it out the next day. And then he also set me up with some rotors for the back of the car. So these are 10.9-inch rotors. So compared to a stock Miata rear rotor, I mean, this thing is huge. This is going to help, again, like the front, this will help dissipate heat. And while the 1.8 rotor is still a single piston, you'll get less brake fade on track, especially with an aggressive pad. You'll have more stopping power just due to the pad alone. The combination is going to be really good for a street setup on the HPSs and a track setup on the DTC 60s. This is what Nigel actually runs on his track car, and then he runs the HPSs on the street. So big shout out to Nigel. I'll be walking us through the install process on these. These are really nice. This just looks like machined aluminum, but I mean, it's got a really nice finish. They engraved the Flowforce injectors on here. Really, really quality part. I believe this was made by Track Dog Racing, and now Flowforce owns the rights to make them. Fairly budget upgrade too, so if you already have a 1.8, you can get these adapters, both sides, and the hardware is $130 from Flowforce. You can bolt them right up, buy a set of rotors for like 50 bucks, and then you have essentially 1.8 Sport rears. The Sport caliper is not that much better. It's still single piston. It's a little bigger. You don't really get benefits until you go 2 to 4 piston caliper setups like Willwood. So there's no sense in dropping huge money on a set of Sport rears when you already have essentially the same kit. You just need bigger rotors. So give these guys a check out. I will put their link in the description below. Great customer service. So the rear brake install is going to be a little different. I already dropped, you saw in the last episode, I took the subframe out, so I'm going to do this while it's out of the car. It's going to add a little complexity to it on my end, but the process is the same for you guys. So to take the old brake setup off, there's a 10mm bolt back here. So once it's free, you'll just pull it back. It's probably about an inch outside of the back of the rubber here. You'll spin it up, and then the top is just a built-in piston. So this whole thing comes right out. And then here again, we've got some 14mm bolts on the carrier. You can take your pads out if you want now. These are gonna go in the garbage. So 14mm bolts right here. You can probably do the same thing we did on the front, where I just took these right off without removing the carrier. So there you have it. That's all the caliper carrier is on a 1/6. So since we were running the flow force adapters, we're just going to kind of chuck this guy along with the 1/6 brakes. And then your rotor slides off. So this is a stock 1/6 rotor. We're not going to be reusing this. It's too small for what we're trying to do, but all this can stay. So this is just your hub. And then the reinstall is going to be the opposite, but I do want to go over the pad size or rotor size differences. So we'll do that first. 1/6 stock rotor, NB sport rotor. So this really shows you a pure size comparison of the two. So again, same with the fronts. We're getting about an inch bigger radially. So this is actually a 2-inch bigger rotor. What I'll do is measure that guy real quick. So the stock 1/6 rear rotor is 9 inches, pretty much on the dot. And we already know that the NB Sport rotor is 10.9, so just shy of 11 inches. The fronts are 11s. So this is, we're gonna fill the wheel well out much more than we were. We're gonna have better cooling. We'll have better pads. So the whole assembly is gonna be way better. It's gonna look way more serious. If you've ever seen a 1/6 Miata brake setup, it looks like comically small. So this will look sick. That's the size comparison. And now we're just gonna snap to the reassembly. We're gonna go ahead and install this flow force injectors adapter bracket to fit 1/8 sport brakes from an NB onto my 1/6 knuckles. This will work on NA 1/8 and NB 1/8 non-sport knuckles as well. So it's actually a really nice versatile unit. So the way it works is you bolt this bracket up, which has nice recessed pockets back here, onto the hub, and then you'll see the new, essentially, relocated bracket holes that on a stock hub are these two. So this is where you'll bolt your caliper carrier to, and then you'll bolt the caliper up to that, and then that pushes the caliper out far enough that you can fit the 10.9-inch sport rotor on there while utilizing a factory caliper, which is really nice. But they give you everything you need to install it, so we're going to go ahead and get started with that. The first thing is to bolt this bracket up to here using the hardware they send you. So I'm going to use some red Loctite. I don't like my brakes coming loose, so I'm just going to put a little dab of red Loctite on there. And then this threads in from the back, just like that. Next up, we're going to throw the rotor on. Remember to clean these before you install them. My hands are filthy, so I'm going to give it a wipe down at the end. But that'll just sit over top like that. You can put a lug nut on it if you want it. I'm not going to bother for now. And then now we'll go grab the caliper carrier, which goes around this. So up next is throwing some pads on the car. These are Hawk HPS, so they're performance street pads. You can tell right here it's got a little squeaker. This thing goes on the back. That way if you are running low on stoppies, it will let you know. Another good thing to do at this point is to grease your slider. This stuff is so nasty. You don't need a lot, it goes a long way. So just kind of get the end and it'll push its way in. This way your calipers can move back and forth freely. And then you'll grab your caliper, which, if you're ever curious about which side is which, the bleeder will always point up because air is going to travel up. If it's pointed down, you will not be able to bleed your brakes and you'll be miserable. So make sure you've backed your caliper off. So what you'll do if you have to do that is loosen this 14 millimeter, take it all the way out, and then inside there's a hex head. You just turn it all the way left and then take a caliper retractor tool and retract your piston. Do not, try to push it in without taking that screw out. You'll damage something. But I forgot to do that, so I'm going to do that right now. So once you've recessed that, you'll slide this on to the top piston and then bring it down. Sometimes if the rotor's not flat, it'll be a bit of a struggle, so just either push it in or adjust for it. That's where the lug nut will help sometimes. So then once you've got it mostly on, the next thing you want to do is, this is a pin as well as there's threads on the end of it, so I'm going to need both hands to do it. So I'm just going to kind of wiggle this around until it seats. You can see it's still loose, and then just thread it in. It's a 10mm nut on the end, and just go until it's, you know, pretty tight. You don't need to crank on it. There's not a lot of thread engagement on the end of it. The tools you'll need is a wrench to open the brake line. This one, 5/16 fits. I don't have the metric equivalent for some reason. And then you'll also want a brake bleeder. So either you can bother a friend to come over and push the brake like 1,000 times for you, or you can go to AutoZone, Harbor Freight, Amazon, and pick up one of these. It's a self-pump bleeder. So as you pull this, you can hear it pulling air. It'll pull brake fluid through this line. It'll collect the brake fluid in this reservoir. It's essentially a one-man bleed. And I bought this a couple years ago because I got sick of having to wait for somebody to come over and help me. Game changer. Bleeding clutches, bleeding brakes, everything. This is the best tool for it. They make some pneumatic versions that are pretty trick, but I hate running the air compressor, so this thing is perfect for me. The other thing you're going to want to do is make sure your brake master cylinder has fluid in it. As you bleed the brakes, go around and check, you know, bleed one brake or get halfway through it, go check, make sure there's still fluid. If you bleed it and you run out of fluid, as you continue to bleed it, you're just going to start pulling air in, and you will be continuously pulling air into your system, and you'll never bleed your brakes. So just keep an eye on it. You probably go through a bottle, maybe two, depending how much you have to bleed or how much you want to bleed through your system. This is your brake bleed. Sometimes it has a little rubber cap on it like this guy. You'll just pop it off and then make sure you put it back on when you're done. That way no dust and dirt gets in there. You'll want to slip the wrench over first. It might be easier to use the open end depending how much angle you have. And then you will slip over your brake line, or your brake bleeder, sorry. And then open the line and just start pumping. The next step for the rear brakes is setting your e-brake. So once you've bled both sides, you want to make sure that you do your e-brake so your parking brake works when you are, you know, parked. This part is pretty easy. It's seen a lot of Miatas that don't have functioning e-brakes, and it blows my mind. So the right process is make sure your e-brake handle is down all the way. Take that 14mm screw out on the back, or bolt from earlier, and then inside you'll find a 4mm Allen head. So put this in here, and we're gonna tighten it until you feel it snug up, and it locks the rotor up like that, so I can't turn the rotor by hand anymore. And then you just want to back off until you can spin the rotor again. It's like quarter turn maybe, and then you'll put this guy back in. You can test it by pulling your e-brake and making sure that when your e-brake is pulled, you cannot move your axle. I'm probably gonna get flamed for this. I don't have springs in here to pull these pads back. Haven't ran them in like 4 or 5 years. I started not running them because I forgot to put them in many years ago, and now I just don't have a set. So it's never really bothered me. You'll just hear the pads kind of clank when you go over a bump. If anybody has a set just kicking around, I'll install them if you want to ship them to me, but you know, I'm not going to go out and find a set somewhere and worry about installing them. All it does is spread the pads so that you don't hear any rotor dragging. You won't hear rotor dragging anyways. Once it's moving, the pads will back themselves off, but little details. If I run across the set, I'll throw them in. But so once you've bled your brakes, all that's left is to put the wheels back on and then just go bed the brakes, which if you watched the earlier episode, all it takes is going, you know, 70, 80 miles an hour down to 20 miles an hour. Let off, go back up, do that a couple times. It just mates the pad face to the brake rotor face, and that's all there is to it. So as you can see, maybe it might be too dark in there, but Rear brakes are on. They look great. They stop great. I have had zero problems with the adapter bracket from Flowforce. It's a really great product. I'm a huge fan, and anybody I know who's trying to get big brakes around here, I'm going to try and push them in this direction. It's a great alternative to either Willwoods or the bigger sport calipers in the back. Check them out. Links down below in the description. Again, not a sponsored piece, but love the product and I love the results, so I'm gonna give them a shout out anyways. But if you like this kind of stuff, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell. We post every Wednesday and Saturday, and definitely, you know, smash the like button down below and leave us a comment and let me know what else you want to see. We got some great content coming for you once we start build season. Both Miatas are getting turbos. Both Miatas are going to be properly fast come next spring, and I'm really excited to not only do the process but take you guys along for the ride. So stick around. Really appreciate the support from everybody, and see you next Wednesday.